Thank you.
When Andrew called me a couple of months ago, he said that, Simonetta, you should come to this conference. You can tell what you want, but you have to do it in 30 minutes. And he knows that I tend to digress and to take space. So the only possibility that I had in order to give back my promise that I would have not take more space, that was to bring all what I want to say and have the possibility to tell you today into a script. So forgive me if I will give you an already written reading. So at the beginning of this century, Zygmunt Bauman, one of the most significant social thinkers of our times, used for the first time the notion of liquidity to describe our societies in the age of late modernity. And most of us were actually too fast and too superficial in interpreting Bauman's liquid societies theory as a kind of nostalgia for the previous stage of our Western modern society, that is to say, the early modernity characterized by a rational, well-organized, stable and solid system, whose foundation was based on the perpetuity of immutable principles and values, solid principles, absolute values that were supposed to generate prosperity and resist to any kind of socio-economic earthquake. And I would be very cautious about joining into any nostalgia for that kind of solidity, because by doing so we would forget that those societies were actually very rigid and therefore very fragile societies. Societies that were run by a deeply aggressive ideology. It was exactly that pretended solidity and rigidity that was hindering Western society's ability to adapt to all changes that inevitably come with the flow of time. And we shouldn't forget that the presumed solidity of the 20th century's Western systems was in reality the result of the disgregation of a colonial imperialism. It was the firmness proclaimed by charismatic chiefs, but also tyrants, who used their loud voices for igniting the bellicosity and the thirst for revenge of deeply impoverished and totally subordinated masses of people. And we know today that those papier-mâché solid constructions generated some of the bloodiest wars of all times. Let's not forget that during the last century, 70 million people died, 40 million only in Europe, because of solid bellicosity. But if we zoom into the middle of the last century, into the wasteland left behind by the two world wars, we see that at that point, the sun of a new age started to rise, the age of mass consumerism. Unlike previous sunrises, this one came from west, all the way from what we in Europe call the new continent. It was a new and happy ideology, and it was singing and dancing boogie-woogie. So we joined the dance floor with no reluctancy, and we also bought the ticket to that paradise called American Dream that we learned about in Hollywood movies and tasted in Coca-Cola and Marlboro cigarettes. And that was the real beginning, I think, of our late modern liquid society. A society dominated by mass media and the mass market's new ideology, an ideology that by its very nature needed to become fluid, soft, and persuasive in order to seduce people and make them dream. And the myth of consumerism was thus established as an egalitarian utopia of social mobility, work flexibility, social elasticity, because only such a societal pliability would have been able to absorb the booming impetus of an economy that was supposed to grow at exponential rates forever. Not by chance, I guess consumer goods marketing borrowed its lingo from military language, targeting customers, intercepting people's wish and wants, conquering market shares, launching advertising campaigns, penetrating consumer hearts and minds. And not by chance, I guess, Donald Draper, the lead character in Mad Men, came back from the Korean War before joining the advertising business. In less than half a century, our mass consumption economy and culture expanded globally. The long wave of the liquid mass society became a flood that submerged whole nations across continents. The only problem is that today, the debt-driven hyper-consumerism's fever on one side and the so-called creative, speculative financial economy on the other side have together transformed whole countries into swamps of new poverty. Today, our liquid societies are not able to embank the tsunami of the global financial disruption provoked by some, actually very few, centers of financial power that for the last 3 decades have been sharing, only among them, the profit of rampant speculations, most of them based on negative ecological and social balances. Our liquid societies are floating or drawing in an ocean of debt. States cannot shoulder their own, much less other states' defaults provoked by that Ponzi-like brainless financing, and where they suddenly introduce their austerity measures, the scary asymmetry of such an obnoxious unfairness is becoming evident for the many people and is provoking, on one side, depression, on the other side, unrest and turmoil from west to east, from north to south on our globalized planet. So politicians are racking their own brains for finding new milestones, measures, without having any touchstone. Erratic countermeasures are floating, fluctuating, and then desperately trying to surf on the crest of the financial market's short but big waves before shipwrecking in the tempest of financial rates. Politicians and economists are yelling and evoking growth, growth, growth. We need growth, otherwise we are lost. But Lady Growth, the magical nanny who overflooded our mass markets with material goods and our financial markets with derivative options and futures that for a long time popped out of her Mary Poppins-like bottomless carpet bag, is popped out. Lady Growth has instead become a kind of elusive phantom, a kind of ectoplasm, floating over the talking heads of all those pundits invited to talk at TV shows. So to grow or to degrow, that is the question of our contemporary times. And that's kind of depressing because, as you know, Hamlet-like dilemmas always foreshadow misfortune and tragedy. Okay, so what? What can we do? Dive into despair? Drown in prophecies? Absolutely not. On the contrary, cheer up, because our liquid societies, exactly because they aren't solid and rigid constructions, they hold within themselves a crucial fundamental quality: resilience. Resilience is formed by the suffix re, that stands for reiteration, and salio, which means jumping, pulsing, gushing, spurting. For example, aqua saliens means running water. Risalio meant, for the ancient Latins, the effort of climbing back on the boat that had been overturned by the tempest. So the wisdom of words is indicated in the term resilience, which conveys the properties and the strength of water on one side, and the psychological capability of fighting and never surrendering on the other side. Exactly because of the fact that our societies are liquid, they can generate dissolving processes of power structures or institutions. Interesting hydraulic mass movements and mass behaviors can adapt, but also disrupt them, as Nobel laureate Elias Canetti described in his essay, Crowds and Power. From a psychological point of view, the resilience of individuals and collectivities is the capability to persist, to insist, to not lose heart in spite of all many negative events and difficulties that always traumatize the path of our lives. Persist and not just exist stands for that kind of determination that makes us find a way out in cases of emergency provoked by elements we understand as temporary and contingent. The psychological resilient character of both individuals and societies is therefore what allows us to keep our intent, that is our inner tension, with the so-called élan vital, a vital leap, bounce, impetus after any stressing and traumatic events. It is what makes people reorganize themselves and continually readapt to new realities. Now that we have understood the difference between vital liquid state of our societies from the symptoms of societal dissolution, let us now apply the notion of resilience to consumers' patterns. Resilience is a given for people living in our liquid late modern societies, since the presumed modus vivendi, the univocal way of life of modernity, has dissolved. And we can definitely say that people are readapting their way of life and their value systems after the shock of realizing that they are in a permanent state of precariousness. Let me give you some snapshots of the mindset of and the motives of people living in our Western mature economies and in a marketplace that got hyper-saturated with all kinds of material goods. Let's speak about the traumata of excess civilization. We all know that on the other side of the planet there is the overabundance of a good that has become extremely scarce on our side of the planet, and that is hope. The hope in a growth of their prosperity that is mainly based on achieving for themselves our Western lifestyles and our consumerist culture. While on this side of our planet we see the end of the dream of constantly growing material prosperity and of social ladder climbing. This was the dream of John and Jane Doe when they were, until quite recently, still identifying themselves as members of an increasingly wealthy middle class. For them, the Damocles sword of a next energy crisis and the soaring costs of basic foods, of their children's education, and of the healthcare system has become a serious problem. They have noticed that the bursting of the speculative bubbles, as well as every cut of the welfare, has also left deep holes in their own pockets. They know that our planet Earth is seriously sick. They watch wars and climate disasters on television. They see new waves of migrants floating into their countries, and suddenly they feel that everything is, one way or another, interconnected. Thus, the life of John and Jane Doe has changed abruptly and quite unexpectedly. Concerns about their standard of living are added to private crises, which are accelerated by the decline of the traditional family model and the dissolution of obsolete gender roles. In view of the economic, social, and environmental turbulences of our time, our previous lifestyle aimed at material, ephemerally hedonistic, and irrationally entertaining consumption can no longer provide the security they desperately need today. And what was so self-evident until recently now seems remarkably unreasonable. Let's talk now about what could be regarded as the four main consumer psychological patterns, or better said, characters, that drive the different ways people are activating their resilience capability after today's manifold shocks. And please let me first alert you so that we don't misunderstand each other. Standard behaviors don't exist. That's obvious. Individuals and social groups always react on the basis of their cultural peculiarity, historical specificity, and so on. But even so, we can orient ourselves by following the wisdom of the human character archetypes, that is, the psychological programs that in part shape human behavior. So the sensuality-driven consumer pattern is today, I want to have it more and I want to have it cheaper, and is related to the reckless, hedonistic, warm-blooded, sensual character. It is the character archetype on which our excess civilization is based. It drives the dominant pattern of all those social realities still defined by a low rate of social awareness and zero sense of responsibility, which are still dominated by the classical consumerism basic instincts. And these consumers don't care if goods are made in China, Bangladesh, or Brazil, if they are made in sweatshops or by exploiting children's labor, nor if their manufacturing is hoovering up our scarce and finite planet resources. They only understand that these cheap products are precisely what enable them to more or less maintain their standard of living despite declining real income. This is a typical pattern we find in those Western societies or in those societal groups that are still dominated by the persuasive power of old-style mass media with TV in the central position. We must be aware that this command for cheaper and cheaper, more is not enough stuff, brings today the efficiency of large-scale based industrial mass consumption system into big troubles. Because when consumers just go for more of the cheapest offerings, they drive down not just goods production, unit cost, and product quality, but also drive up the collateral cost of fewer safety precautions, larger ecological footprints, and more indignity for the workers. And this kind of consumerist resilience will persist until prices deflation will inexorably hit bottom, while people's purchasing power will fall through the bottom, and when the shopping binge based on voracity will be forced to consumption austerity, it will be sustained by malaise and a deep sense of loss. And at that point, aggressive and panic-driven consumer behavior will rise. Yes, but on the other hand, every hedonist character has not only a shadow zone, but also a sunny, a happy one. And this kind of consumer would be the best ally of the third industrial revolution proclaimed by thinkers as Jeremy Rifkin or the adherents of natural capitalism. Because if we would make it to switch to a new green economy and a way of life, if we would make it in time to reconvert our whole industrial mass market industry into a green real economy, this kind of consumers would be the #1 green consumers. Although I must say that the precondition of such a shift would need the design of beauty, pleasure, desirability, and a relevant quota of sex appeal embedded into a new generation of sustainable product offer. The design of a new aesthetic of such a new ethos would be the conditio sine qua non of such a conversion. The second resilience pattern is based on rationality, awareness, system thinking, and that is the attitude of selecting the best goods of everybody's good, for everybody's good. Since rationality is the dominant attitude, in this case, in front of danger, there is no panic, no emotional decisions, but analytical reflection, rationality, responsibility, frugality, and sobriety. To this category belong consumers that only buy what they have been investigating, examining, comparing, and value matching against all possible goods on the marketplace. And those are the most shopping reluctant consumers. If consumers of the first category are driven by shopping bulimia, consumers of this category are affected by shopping anorexia. They are the kind of consumers who are not much impressed by advertising campaigns and any other marketing technique, but eventually always notice the discrepancy between the promises of advertising wonderland and their asymmetry with the real world. They are the ones, for example, that take their empty, neatly rinsed bottles and cans into those supermarkets that sell unpackaged commodities on self-service racks. They say they do so because they are convinced they are saving money since they can buy only the amount of foods they really need. Furthermore, they say that by doing so, they are not contributing as much to other planets' pollution. They are the professional consumers who consistently turn their attention to the quality-price ratio of what they eventually are still ready to buy. And furthermore, these kind of consumers are not on their own when they go shopping, because thanks to the new media, they exchange their knowledge and expertise about what to buy and where to buy it, and form alliances with others for smarter or more responsible consumption. And they are the watchdogs of consumer goods marketplace. And they are the ones that whenever a new scandal happens in the consumer good business are activating the word-of-mouth propaganda, and by doing so, they can destroy brands overnight that are not behaving in what they consider a correct way. All what they do is very right and very true, but the problem is that the counterpart of such a rational evaluating approach is not a rational economic machine that one can fine-tune through rational principles today. Economy, in times of crisis, is a deeply unreasonable machine. Resilience, if exclusively based on rationality, is weak, in spite of its open, cosmopolitan, enlightened scope, because rationality, by being far-sighted, often ignores the threatening reality which is nearby and is obstructing the path to what would be a truly reasonable and meaningful change in the way we consume. So the third, sometimes thought to be a more evolved consumer pattern, is based on empathy. That is a sentimental approach. These kind of consumers evaluate what they buy from a values-driven perspective. This is the category of consumers that, for example, have today also identified the culprit of the crisis in the globalization and delocalization. They are the consumers who try to reduce the effects of the crisis shock by going back to purchasing local products. Some of them have started to find alternatives to conventional consumer goods systems. They are forming new co-ops, purchasing groups in order to be able to acquire a certain authentic, original, ethnic, pure, biological, traditional, pristine products directly from the suppliers. City people tolerate long rides in order to buy organic products directly from the farmers. If the country people themselves aren't already delivering them a fixed amount of fresh fruit and veggies for a fixed price at home every week. The low food miles notion, that usually stands for low carbon products that haven't been imported from faraway countries, has become an issue for those many people in our Western countries. In my country, where we always tend to exaggerate, we call it 0 kilometer. And the most popular 0 kilometer label at the moment stands for products that are manufactured in the only place with the lowest possible rate of mobility, that is in prison, with the profits going to the detainees' cooperatives. And there are many more of these products than you can imagine. such as the ice cream, prisoners of taste. And of course, its brand is misspelled, so that it sounds as I scream, I shout. And what about the organic quail's eggs also produced by prisoners branded as farmhouse Al Capone? Also popular is the fashion label CDSB, which means barcode, but also mean behind bars in Italian. It is possibly the only Italian fashion brand where customers can be 100% certain that it is really made in Italy. And I don't know if you have heard about the new vitamin that is also becoming more and more popular in my country. It is called vitamin L, and L stands for legality. And it's contained, for example, in products from Sicilian cooperatives, which explicitly fight against organized crime by cultivating the land confiscated from the mafia. But apart from Italy, a country that has always been living in a permanent state of crisis and resilience to the crisis from the times of Romolo and Remo, today we see joining together people in forming peaceful armies in most of our Western countries. As John yesterday told us, they are armed with rakes and hoes and seeds in order to use the smallest patch of disused land in the city, sometimes also in a very provocative and arty way, I would say, or in the countryside where they rent from farmers fields for the cultivation of crops, and even at home they have started growing vegetables on their roofs and keeping chickens on their balconies. And they do that not only to relieve their household budget, of course, but also to revitalize the old model of self-supply on a few square meters of freedom. The positive aspect of this consumer pattern is its vision based on solidarity and mutual exchange. Two old and timeless remedies humanity has always used to withstand crisis repercussions on their lives and communities. But the myth of autarkic, self-sustaining systems is a dream on one side, but its dark side is to this attitude is the risk of understanding communities as closed, isolated, and stagnant local systems with all the accompanying implications of regression and devolution. There is finally a fourth category of resilient consumer pattern based on intuition. This character merely looks at the world as it is. He is able to patiently wait until, in a glance, solutions are seen that can solve a problem. Intuition is the capability to smell the air and to inductively make the right choice. And this is an attitude that implies a readiness for risk, because resilience in this case does not grant success, but allows a valid bet on success. Inductive resilient characters are also very open to paradoxes. And I think I don't need to explain in this country of fire and ice what means a paradox. But I'd like to underline the paradox of a category of consumers who are today turning around the non-logical paradigm of less is more. There is no rational way to calculate and give evidence that less is more is true, that consuming and producing less is giving us back more jobs, more free time, more happiness, and meaningfulness. Less is more is simply based on the principle that not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. Albert. To this category of consumption pattern belongs all individuals and communities that are designing new models of prosperity, new ways of life, and new style of thoughts. The most innovative and most promising social innovations that go in that direction seem to be driven by the so-called transition culture communities. This transition movement is made of new social enterprises like cooperatives, time banks, social businesses, community-owned assets, ventures. And transition thinking is a positive thinking that is spreading as a collective phenomena that indeed is representing not only green, deep green thinking, but also a lot of deeply sustainable actions. And thousands of individuals, groups, and organizations are busy worldwide in designing ways to qualitatively produce and share resources. Resources like energy, matter, time, skill, software, space, or food. Active and innovative citizens are designing new business models. And that this is in an area where design and design thinking plays a crucial role in our resilience, in our effort to find a way out to the current economic and ecological crisis, because design is mainly based on the inductive capability of producing new visions of possible futures. The resilience of all kinds of social innovators who are worldwide persisting with the same strength of water streams or water drops in their attempt of dissolving the solid structures of our old and rigid governance institutions and unsustainable economic system with new visions of the future is what gives us hope for the future we thought we had lost. So, friends and colleagues, the resilience of our liquid societies to the present crisis is based on many clear and foresighted actions that should tackle the complexity of our actual global system as soon as possible before it is too late. But let's not forget that resilience is also based on the psychological capability to mix and harmonize the four character archetypes I just mentioned. While on one hand, we do know that a perfect equilibrium of human psychology never exists, on the other hand, we know that resilience is exactly the quality that is needed to surf the tumultuous and recurring waves that produce the permanent state of crisis of our epoch. Today, my task was that of conjugating the notion of resilience linked with the big turmoil, mass consumerism, his experiences today, and I can therefore conclude by giving you a bit of the latest news. The last act has begun in the Odyssey of consumption, the return of Ulysses to Ithaca. Because just as Ulysses, after his long wanderings and encounters with too many beguilements and illusions, people today, after having almost drowned in the ocean of so many consumerist fleeting seductions, delusions, and disappointments, are also resiliently making it to reach the shore of a promising island made of enjoyable, reasonable, lovable, and innovative sustainable futures. The era of excess civilization is finished. It must finish. That party is over. We know that it must be over. But a new feast can start that is rich with happiness, but respects frugality. Late consumerist societies have to learn this and apply a little but simple insight if they want to survive. Consuming less, conjugating with consuming better, or why not, let's say, the best. And this would be a sign of wisdom, the wisdom of resilience, which tells us that at the end of a story, there is always the beginning of a new story, but a better story. Thank you.
That's fantastic, Simonetta.